Hey, it's Travel Gigolo, and today I'm going to share one of my favorite recipes with you, which is lamb curry. So, National Braai Day is coming up, and normally we would do a braai, but this time we're going to do a potjie. And a potjie is actually a pretty good way to do a lamb curry because it gives a nice smoky flavor, which really adds a nice nuance to the usual lamb curry flavor. A potjie is a pretty popular way of cooking in Southern Africa in general and South Africa in particular. If you don't know what a potjie is, then I'm going to quickly explain what that is. This is a potjie, otherwise known in English as a three-legged pot, and there are various names for it in different languages. It's typically a cast iron pot with three legs that you would put on top of a wood fire. Right, let's get to the ingredients. The first and most obvious thing you need is a set of lamb pieces, or stewing lamb as it's referred to when you buy it in the supermarket at the butchery, otherwise known as lamb potjiekos, depending on where you buy it from. And that is obviously the primary ingredient for our lamb curry. You can of course just buy different pieces of lamb and chop it up into the size that you prefer. When I choose my stewing lamb, I like to choose something with just a little bit of fat, not too much fat because obviously I want more meat and fat. It's got to have a little bit of fat and some bones as well. And I'm going to render that fat inside the potjie, and that brings a nice flavor to the curry as well. I'm going to leave a list of ingredients below in the description for this particular episode, so you don't have to worry too much about following as to how much I'm using in what ratios. I'm going to use about 1.5 kilograms of lamb pieces today, and that is kind of the thing that will set up how much I'm going to use of each of the other ingredients. Next is onions. You can use brown onions or red onions, it doesn't really matter. I prefer brown onions because I prefer a little bit of flavor that comes with those, and I do think that they caramelize a bit better than red onions. It's a personal taste, it's my personal opinion. You can use either one of these, they're both really good. Now I typically use about 1 onion per 500 grams of meat. What you're going to note, I think, as I talk about this is that the thing with curries in general is that you're going to get a feel for this as you cook it, and you will maybe change some of those ingredient ratios as it suits you. Next is fresh peppers. Now, not many people use peppers in a curry. I like peppers because they bring a particular aroma and a little bit of sweetness as well if you caramelize them nicely in the potjie. You can use red peppers and yellow peppers and green peppers. I prefer to stick with red and yellow peppers just because I think they've got a nicer aroma that they bring to the food, but green peppers are good as well. Garlic. I like to use 1 or 2 cloves of garlic per 500 grams of meat, and it depends on how much you like garlic. My significant other loves garlic, so you can use double that. You can use 3 or 4 cloves per 500 grams of meat. It's really up to you. I think 1 or 2 cloves per 500 grams is pretty good, and in this case I'm going to use 3 cloves altogether for 1.5 kilograms of meat, and that's pretty lean. You could use quite a bit more than that. Fresh ginger, also essential to making a curry. Your ginger to garlic ratio really depends on you. I like to use about a 1:3 ratio. So I've got 3 cloves of garlic that I'm going to use, and I'm going to use 1 piece of fresh ginger. That's about the same amount as 1 clove of garlic. You can buy, of course, a pre-mix of ginger and garlic from any supermarket. I prefer to do it myself because then it's really fresh and you've got all those fresh flavors and aromas that come from the garlic and the ginger. When it's been sitting in the shop for a while, it's probably not as fresh, and also a lot of the time the supermarkets or the suppliers don't actually put a lot of garlic and ginger in there. There's a lot of essence of garlic, for example, so it's not quite the same as doing it from fresh. Curry powder. So you can make your own curry powder yourself from scratch, and you can go and buy cumin and paprika and cinnamon and turmeric and pepper and whatever else you want to put into your curry powder. It's a lot easier to just go and buy a pre-mixed set of curry powder. If you've got a market that's close to you that's got fresh curry powder that's freshly made, that's great as well. But typically you just go and buy it in the supermarket. It's a lot easier than trying to do it yourself from scratch and get the ingredient ratios right and buy just the amount of whatever it is that you need to use. So I recommend just go and buy something that's really nice that you like. So many different brands of curry powder out there. I like this brand in particular for my lamb curry powder, and you can find this in most supermarkets in South Africa. And this is Osman's Taj Mahal Extra Special Mutton Masala. A quick tip for keeping your spices fresh: this is a really nice piece of kit. This is called an easy lock, and you can use that to lock or seal your packets of curry powder, whatever spices that you have after you've used them. And you'll find that in my top 10 camping gear episode, so have a look at that as well. That's a really nice thing to have, and it's actually really user-friendly for a lot of different purposes, just to keep your fresh food fresh that you keep in packages. Chopped tomatoes. So you can go get fresh tomatoes and you can chop them yourself, which is good. It's great. It's always nice to cook from fresh. Canned tomatoes works as well, and if you're a little bit lazy like myself, then use canned tomatoes. It's really easy. Also, if you're traveling and you're camping and that sort of stuff, then it's just a lot more convenient to have stuff in cans, things like tomatoes in particular. So that's the basic formula for a curry. Everything I'm going to talk about from here on is additional. So this is stuff that I add, that I like to have in my curry because I think it brings great flavor to the curry. I like to add beans to my curry, and you can use different types of beans. Red kidney beans is probably my favorite, but also this 4-bean mix is pretty good. So this is a mix of red kidney beans, borlotti beans, butter beans, and cannellini beans. It depends on what you like. You can go only with cannellini beans, for example. I particularly like red kidney beans and a mix of beans as well. So this, I think, brings a bit more protein to the dish, and it also gives it a nice consistency, especially if you're going to be eating your curry with roti. Eggplant or brinjal. I love these in a potjie. I wouldn't normally use this if I'm doing a curry on the stove, but it works really well in the potjie because there's quite a significant amount of time for it to break down into the curry and to sort of blend into there and bring a really nice flavor as well. Okay, onion cutting time. You can cut this into fairly rough pieces. It's got to be relatively finely chopped. It doesn't have to be very finely chopped. It's going to go into a potjie, but you want it to brown a bit so you get a bit of sweetness, a bit of caramelization on the onions. Once I've chopped the onions, I'm going to salt them. The reason for this is going to draw out a bit of moisture, and that just makes it a bit easier to brown the onions. We're going to go a bit beyond sauteing them in the potjie. We're going to take them to a point where they're lightly brown so they're nice and sweet. I would normally salt these in an open plate, so it's just a bit of a more spread out layer of onions. However, we're using a bowl here, it's not really the end of the world. And how much salt you're going to use for that really depends on your preferences. So in this case, I'm going to use about, I would estimate that's about half a teaspoon of salt or so. You can add more or less depending on your particular preference for the amount of salt that you use. I don't typically have a lot of salt in my food. Next up is the peppers. I'm going to cut these quite roughly. Now you want to have relatively large chunks of these relative to the onions because you don't want them to cook too far. You want to maintain some of that flavor and some of that aroma that comes from the peppers when you brown them with the onions. Next up, I'm going to do a couple of cloves of garlic. Now normally I would have started these in the potjie already, and then I would be chopping my garlic and my ginger as I go along. For the purposes of the video and to make stuff clear, I'm going to kind of do it sequentially and do all the chopping first and do all the cooking. But in reality, you would do a lot of these things in parallel when you're actually preparing a dish in real life because it's just a lot quicker and more efficient that way. Right, I'm going to do the ginger next. I prefer to keep my ginger and my garlic separate because I will put them in at slightly different times. I won't put them in as a mixture, although you can do that as well if that's your preference. In my case, I prefer to put the ginger in first and let it cook a little bit before I put the garlic in. So I want the garlic in for just a short period of time before I pour other stuff into the potjie pot. The brinjal as well, I'm going to chop really roughly. You'll note that a lot of the stuff I'm doing is quite rough cut. It's not really fine chopping, and that's because it's going to a potjie and it's going to be there for quite a fair amount of time. So you don't need to salt these, or you don't need to sweat them. Rather, you can just chop them into relatively rough pieces, and that will go into the curry at the appropriate time. Okay, so now we've got our coals hot. What we need to do is transfer those to underneath the potjie. In this case here, I've used charcoal. It's just quicker. You can, of course, use conventional wood as well, which I think a lot of people prefer to using charcoal. So in this case here, we've got charcoal. We're going to put that underneath the potjie. Now, what I've done here is I've set this up inside of a small fire pit, and the reason for that is I don't want to burn the grass. So I just want an elevated position where I can put the potjie down, and also just a bit of gap between the potjie and the actual piece of steel that it will sit on here, or the tray that it will sit on. So of course you can do this on a concrete surface or in a fire pit, for example, and that will work just fine as well. So now we're going to let our pot get nice and hot, and it is cast iron, it's quite thick, it's quite heavy, so it can take a little bit of time to get that heat uniformly through the pot. Of course, cooking with cast iron is great for that reason, that it's a nice, dense, heavy piece of pottery, and you have the same advantage that you would have on a stove or a gas stove, for example, where if you put stuff inside the pot, it doesn't cool down as quickly, and so that's nice because it's nice for browning the meat and also just for keeping that temperature up while you're cooking. I do have a couple of pieces of wood on the side here, and I want to use the wood to create a bit of smoke. And you want that smoky flavor, and what's going to happen then is that every time we open the pot, there's a couple of swirls of smoke, etc., that'll go into the pot and just infuse into the food, and that gives it a nice smoky flavor. You don't want too much smoke because you don't want to be overpowering in your dish, but a lot of the time the pot's going to be closed except when we're browning the meat. Another thing to note is that we want the pot to be quite hot at the beginning because we want to brown the meat, and we also want to brown the onions and saute the peppers. So at the beginning, you want those coals to be nice and hot, and you're going to leave them pretty much through the rest of the cooking process because they will slowly cool down, and we will get to a point where we're just simmering the curry. We do of course have the chimney on standby, so if we want to make more coals at some point in the process, then we just got to put the chimney on. Now you will have noticed that there are a couple of old coals there on that tray as well when I put on the new coals from the chimney. So those are going to warm up as well and give us just a little bit more heat and a little bit more longevity from those hot coals. In this case, I've used about half of the stack in that chimney, and that is sufficient for the purposes of what we are doing here. It's a little bit of a windy day, so those coals might go a bit quicker, so we might have to add a few later on, but that's generally sufficient for a potjie of this sort. This is not a potjie that's going to run for 8 hours. It's a potjie that's going to run for maybe an hour and a half or so, maybe 2 hours. It's not going to be sitting on the fire the whole day. So depending on how much fat your meat has, you may want to put a little bit of oil in the pot just to start that browning process, but normally lamb has quite a bit of fat on it and that is sufficient. So I'll put just a little bit of oil in here, about a tablespoon or so of oil, just to get that process moving, but I will put the meat that has fat on it fat down onto the sides of the pot so that renders and we get that fat flowing into the pot. So what I normally do to check if the pot has gotten to sort of cooking temperature is just to take a piece of meat and put it against the side of the pot and see how it responds. So you want there to be a bit of sizzle, of course, and that means that your pot is hot enough. Some people might wait until that little bit of oil that's in the pot is smoking. I think that's usually a little bit too far, especially with the cast iron pot where it doesn't cool down very quickly when you put the meat into it. So just a little piece of meat there, go inside the pot and see if it starts sizzling. Okay, so we've got a nice sizzle going, so I'm going to start putting the meat in. Like I said, I want to put the meat in fat side down so that fat renders and flows into the pot, and we're going to use some of that fat to cook our onions and our peppers as well a bit later. So you want to get the meat browned, it's nice and hot inside the pot. You also want to get some of that fat rendered that's on the meat. I like my meat to be not too fatty, a little bit lean, because I don't like too much oil and fat in the dish. However, it does give a fantastic flavor to it. So you want that to get nice and brown and get that nice caramelized flavor into the dish. Note that you want to do this with the pot open. You don't want to close the pot because then all the steam that's coming off there is going to condense on the lid and flow back into the pot. We don't want the meat to boil, we want it to brown. At this point, I'm going to add a bit of wood on the side just to get a little bit of smoke that's going to swirl into the pot as the wind swirls around. Not too much, just a little bit. Like I say, you don't want it to overpower your curry. All right, that's just one piece of wood, and I'm going to put that. So we've got quite a bit of meat in here. And the trick to browning, of course, is that you want to be patient. You want to have it at a good temperature and you want to be patient. If you don't want to be patient, then you can do it in small batches as well, and that's just a little bit quicker and you'll get the browning process going a little bit quicker, but this works as well. And I think part of the point of doing a potjie is that it's a little bit of a long process, and a bit of patience and a bit of socializing around it is also good. So I've added a bit more coal just to get the heat up a little bit more and get that browning process go a bit faster. The browning process has gone quite well and it's time to put the onions in. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to push the meat out and leave an empty hollow in the middle where the bit of fat that's come from the meat is going to collect, and I'm going to use that to brown the onions. So you're going to get the flavor from that meat that's browned, and you're going to infuse that into the onions while you saute them, or rather lightly brown them within the center of the pot. So that's the onions in. We'll let the onions start cooking and get a bit translucent before we add the peppers in. I like to add the peppers in slightly after the onions, or a bit after the onions, because I don't want them to cook too far. I still want that peppery flavor, but they're going to brown just so slightly so that you get a nice aroma from the peppers too. So you do still want quite a bit of heat for your onions, because again, you want them to lightly brown. You don't want them to sit at the pot and at the bottom of the pot and boil. So a bit of heat just to keep that temperature up, keep those onions browning as opposed to boiling at the bottom of the pot. You'll note that some of my wood has lit. You want to be careful about that because you don't want it to get too hot and start burning what's inside the pot, but it's working pretty well so far. There isn't a lot of wood, it's just a couple of small pieces on the side over there, so that's fine. If you add too much wood, you can end up having a pot that's just a little bit too hot, so just look out for that. You want the wood there for a bit of that wood smoke, but you don't want to get too much heat from it. The alternative, of course, is that you can just use a wood fire and not use charcoal like I've done. It's a little bit more difficult to control the temperature with the wood fire because charcoal kind of burns relatively uniformly, and you can light all of it relatively uniformly as well. So the onions have just gone to that translucent stage, and this is exactly the perfect time to put the peppers in. So that's going to slow down the onions a little bit, but that's fine. We do want them to just lightly brown. We don't want to brown them all the way, and we're going to add the peppers in. We want to keep the temperature up still quite a bit because we want those peppers to start browning and to give us that nice aroma from the pepper. Since at this point that I'm going to put in my curry mutton masala. Now, you can put in more or less depending on what you prefer. For 1.5 kilograms like this, I'm going to put about 40 grams of the lamb curry. Now, I like a mild to medium curry, and that's in terms of spices, not in terms of chili. So if you like it a bit more spicy, then you put a bit more of this, and if you like it a bit less spicy, then you put a bit less of this here. Admittedly, I think you need a bit of experience. You need to do this a couple of times before you get to that perfect ratio for yourself. But for me, for this type of pot, for 1.5 kilograms, about 40 grams of this is sufficient. Okay, so our peppers are nice and warmed up and just slightly sauteed as well, and I'm going to put the ginger in now. So I'm going to pretty much mix everything up in the pot and then put the ginger in. The temperature is still quite decent. You don't want the temperature too high when you put the ginger in and the garlic after that, because you don't want, you want to just warm them up and get that flavor and those oils released. So the garlic and the ginger we're doing pretty much towards the end of having done the peppers and the onions. We only just need them in there for a minute, like I've said. So I'm going to add the garlic in afterwards. Going to give the ginger maybe 2 or 3 minutes to just warm up and start releasing that flavor. Then I'm going to put the garlic in. The garlic we only need to be in there for a minute or 2, and then we're going to add the rest of the ingredients. So the ginger's had a couple of minutes and it's time to put the garlic in. So we'll give the garlic just about a minute or so. And I did say we're going to put all the other ingredients in, but we're going to put them in sequentially. We're not going to chuck them all in at the same time, because then that's going to cool the pot down, and we do want the temperature to stay elevated. So I'm going to put the tomatoes in first, give the tomatoes a couple of minutes to warm up and also to start cooking. And then once that's done, I'm going to start adding the other things in. Now, you can leave it at that stage with the tomatoes in and leave the tomatoes to cook for a fair amount of time before you add the other stuff in. And I will normally add the beans in just a little bit late because they are canned beans and I don't want them to cook too far. So I do want them to cook and become part of the dish and to absorb all the flavors, but I don't want it to become absolute mush as well. You can do that, and that is fine. It's part of having a curry as well. It really depends on what you prefer. So 2 cans of tomatoes for this amount of meat. You can put a little bit more if you like. You can put 3 cans. You can also put a little bit less. You can put 1 can, for example. I think 2 cans for me is just right. It gives me just the right amount of consistency for this. Tomatoes also a little bit tart as well. So if you put too much of it, it can be a little bit overpowering for the dish. You want to put in just the right amount for you, and you want to have it cook really well too. If you do put too much tomato, then you may add a bit of sweetness just to cut that acidity and tartness from the tomato. And to do that, you can use a bit of brown sugar. You can also use dates. Dates are actually really nice to add to the dish because it lends a little bit of different flavor to it as well. But just a bit of sweetness if you do go too far with the tomato. So at this point, you want to get a nice simmer so that those tomatoes slowly cook and break down as well. Normally when you make a potjie, it's kind of a layered process and you don't really mix this stuff. In this case, you're making a curry, and a curry is a big mix. So you mix this stuff up. Slightly different to a conventional potjie if you're using beef, for example, and making a conventional beef potjie, if you want to call it that. You can close the lid at this point as well. Note that by adding the tomato, you've added quite a bit of moisture to the dish, so quite a bit of water. So you can control the amount of water or the amount of liquid that's in the dish by opening or closing the lid. So I will leave it open for a while, just to evaporate some of that water so this just thickens a little bit. And then I will close the lid at a time when I think that there is just the right consistency in the pot. Again, it's a personal thing, it depends on how you want it. If the temperature is too high and you want to bring the temperature down, that's quite easy. All you've got to do is spread the coals out a bit so that there isn't as much heat directly under the pot. And obviously as well, the closer the coals are bunched up under the pot, the closer they will be to the bottom of the pot as well. So just distribute those coals until you get the temperature that you are happy with. That's giving you a nice simmer. You don't want it to be too hot because then you may burn the bottom of the pot, and you don't want it to be too cold because it's just going to be a very slow process to get those tomatoes cooked and broken down. So my quality control officers have arrived on the scene to assess the situation, and that is testimony to how good it smells at this point. The tomatoes have had a few minutes to go and I can see them breaking down inside the pot, so that's great. So at this point, I'm going to add the brinjals in. The brinjals are not going to stay in a very solid form, right? They're going to cook quite a long way and they are going to become kind of integrated into the dish, which is fine. If you want to keep pieces of brinjal that are nice and relatively solid, then you can add them on later in the dish as well. I prefer to do it now and to just infuse that flavor through the whole curry. I generally like my curries to be a mix of everything in all the flavors. I don't like to have individual flavors in there. So I want all of that to just mix up and infuse. And just to repeat as well, I would normally not put brinjals in if I'm doing a curry on the stove, which is a relatively quick process. So this is quite a slow process, and in this case the brinjal works quite well. Note, of course, that every time you add veggies into the pot, you're adding a bit more moisture. So at this point, that's a pretty good amount of moisture that I've got in the pot, and I'm just going to let it simmer. I've pushed out the coals because I want the temperature to not be too high. I want it to simmer nice and slowly and get those flavors to really work their way into to integrate into the pot. The traditional way for me to have curry is with roti, of course. You can have it with rice. I like it with brown rice as well in particular, and whatever other starch you want really. You can put it in bread as a bunny chow. There's a lot of ways to have a curry, and a lamb curry in particular. Rotis, that's a whole different ball game on its own. I suggest you go and buy them rather than trying to make them from scratch if you're not a seasoned roti maker. It does take quite a bit of effort and quite a bit of experience to get it right. I may try and do an episode on that at some stage, but to be honest, I'm too lazy to make rotis. I just go and I buy them. I'm also going to show you a trick on how to warm your rotis and keep them warm right at the potjie as you dish up your food and eat it. So one thing I haven't mentioned is chili. Some people like their curries really hot. I like my curries mild. If you want a bit of heat in there, then all you've got to do is chop a chili, red or green, whatever is your personal preference, and chuck it into the curry. I normally don't add extra chili to it unless I really have the feeling for a bit of heat. And of course you can buy curry powder that is hot or mild or medium, whatever the case is. So chili, yeah, I think is quite a traditional part of a curry, and you've got to add as much as you prefer. So our brinjal's looking pretty good. It's nice and cooked now. and I'm gonna add the beans next. You can add them a bit sooner if you want to. You can wait a bit more if you want to. I do not like them to overcook. I do drain them as well before I put them into the pot because they are in brine and I don't want too much salt. I don't like a lot of salt. The amount of salt that you saw me put onto the onions before we cooked them is pretty much all the salt that I put into my dishes. So again, you know how much salt you want is a personal preference. So this time I'm using the 4-bean mix as opposed to red kidney beans. So there are red kidney beans in here, but I like the 4-bean mix as well. Brings a bit of variety to it. If you do find that your heat was too high and you've driven off too much moisture, then you can add a bit of water. So typically add hot water into some boiling water from a kettle or whatever the case is, so it doesn't cool the pot down and then have to reheat. I think about half a cup at a time. You've got to be quite judicious with the amount of water that you put because it's easy to put too much water and it takes quite a long time for it to simmer down again. So I'd say put it in carefully, about half a cup at a time if you think you don't have enough water, and make sure it's boiling. Okay, so now that my curry is done, everything's nice and cooked, the beans are nice and integrated into the pot and they've got some of that flavor infused into them as well. An easy way to heat your roti, which works really well, is to use the lid of the pot. So in this case, all you've got to do is grab that lid and turn it over like that, and that fits in on top of the pot. And then of course you've got to dry it because it's going to have a bit of moisture on it. So you don't want to get your rotis wet. And once you've done that, you can do this with 2 or 3 rotis at a time. Is you just put it onto the lid of the pot, tamp it down a bit so it's touching the lid nicely, or that it's flush with the lid. Leave it there for a few seconds, and once it's warmed up, then just flip it over. If you've got 3 rotis, whatever the case is, you may want to flip them over at different times. Obviously you can't do this with 10 rotis at a time. It depends on how many people you've got around your potjie. So it works very well 2 or 3 rotis at a time. And then also, if you've got people with your rotis warmed up ready and you're eating them, you just keep a couple of them on the lid, and then you can take from time to time and replace them. Right, so rotis are nice and warm. It's time to put some curry into my plate and have a chow. Right, time for some curry and some roti. So at this point you do want to keep the lid on the pot, and you can keep it simmering. You can drop the heat if you want, if you don't want it to cook any further. The longer it cooks, the more the stuff inside the pot will break down as well. So it depends on how you like your curry and the consistency of your curry. So at this point, do keep it closed as well. You also don't want ash coming from underneath and being blown by the wind into the pot too. Absolutely perfect. So a quick reiteration of the process and maybe some key pointers along the way while I chow down on my curry. Firstly, I think chopping the onions and the peppers, it can be a fairly rough chop because you're going to put it into a potjie over quite a period of time. I like to salt the onions so that it draws out a bit of the moisture and makes that browning process or that sauteing process for the onions a bit more efficient. You can use a wood fire or you can use charcoal. The advantage of charcoal, or briquettes in particular, is that they're easy to spread and they also burn relatively uniformly, so it's a bit easier to control the temperature. You want to start by browning your meat. You want to render the fat, so you want a really high temperature at the beginning of the process. So make sure that you've got sufficient charcoal for that, or sufficient wood, whatever the case is. You want that temperature to be quite high, and you want it to be high long enough to get the fat rendered and also to get the meat nice and browned. Then add in your onions. When you add in your onions, you still want a relatively high temperature because you want to saute those onions and you want to get them lightly browned. When the onions get to about translucent, then add the peppers. You can add the peppers at the same time as you add the onions. There's 2 disadvantages to that. The one is that you can overcook the peppers. The other is that you add in quite a significant mass of wet, cold stuff that can bring the temperature down a little bit, and it's going to come up and so on. And you don't want to do that because you want the stuff to brown. Once your onions and your peppers are done, then you're going to put in your ginger a little bit before the garlic, because it needs just a little bit more time to release the oils and the flavors and the aromas that come with the ginger. At this point, you want to bring the temperature down as well. So you're going to add your ginger in 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes after that, you're going to add your garlic in as well. You don't want the garlic to be in there for too long. You really just want to warm it up and get those flavors released, and then you're going to start adding in the rest of your ingredients. Next thing is tomatoes, canned tomatoes or chopped fresh tomatoes, whatever the case is. Tomato puree as well if you prefer that. You want a bit of time for the tomatoes to cook and to break down. If it's too much tomato that you put in there and it's just a little bit too acidic, then you can add a bit of sweetness, so some brown sugar could work, or dates. I prefer dates. It brings a nice bit of flavor to the dish as well. When you put the tomatoes in, you normally want to close the lid. And you want to close the lid then because you don't want to lose too much moisture. So at this point, you've got your pot simmering pretty much, and it's going to slowly break down the rest of the ingredients. So do close the lid at that time. Obviously before, when you're doing the browning and the onions and so on, you want the lid open because you want it hot and you want the water to evaporate. Here you want to keep the water in, and at this point your curry sauce is being manufactured in the pot as well. You can add your curry powder at different times. You can add it after your meat is browned and when you put your onions in, or you can add it when your onions and your peppers are cooked. It depends on how you like that flavor and how strong you want the spice to be. I like to add it when the onions are done, and then it also heats up and you get all those oils and flavors and aromas that are released as well. So it depends on you when you want to do it, but I typically do it when the onions are ready, and onions and peppers are ready before I put in the ginger and the garlic. You can of course do it afterwards as well. It's a matter of preference. I reckon if you're going to try this dish, then maybe try a few different iterations of it until you get it to exactly how you like it. At this point, once you've got the tomato in there, that is a basic curry. Those are the basic ingredients that you need for a curry. So everything after that is pretty much additional stuff. So next come the brinjals. You want the tomato to cook and break down a little bit before you add the brinjals in. You can add them in at the same time that you add the tomatoes as well. But again, the more stuff you put in at one go, the more you bring the temperature down suddenly, and then you've got to warm it up again. So I like to add it in after I've got the tomatoes sort of semi-cooked. The earlier you bring the brinjals in, the more they will cook and integrate into the dish. So if you like a bit of chew on those brinjals, then you want to bring them in a bit later. They do absorb the flavor pretty well, so timing is not that significant with the brinjals insofar as flavor is concerned. I like to put in the beans last because I don't want them to cook too far. I don't want them to become completely mushy inside of the pot. If you like that and you like that consistency in your curry, then obviously you can cook them a bit longer as well. An important point, if you're using beans from scratch, so not beans that are not pre-cooked and that come in a can, then you've got to add those on fairly early, right? I would suggest then that you put those in pretty much at the same time as you put the tomatoes in, because then you need a fair amount of time for those beans to cook. You can use any type of bean really. I like red kidney beans because they just go really well with lamb in my view. However, there are a plethora of beans that you can use in there. You can use lentil or dal beans as they're otherwise known as well. That also works pretty well. Dal beans, however, do take a long time to cook, so you need a fair amount of time for those lentils to cook through properly. And that's it. That is pretty much how I like to make my lamb potjie curry, and I really recommend that you try this. It's not particularly difficult. I don't think you need any special skills to do this. You need a potjie, you need some charcoal, you need all the ingredients, and Bob's your uncle. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it informative. Please hit the like button if you did. Leave a comment below. Give me some of your curry tips as well. It'll be interesting to see those. I'd like to try them too. And if you haven't subscribed, then please do subscribe. Those of you that have subscribed, thank you. I appreciate all the support. And until the next episode, go everywhere, see everything, have a great time. This is a potjie, so now you know. So I'm going to start by chopping my onions. You can do quite a rough chop here. It doesn't really matter. It's going to go in the potjie. It doesn't need to be a very finely chopped onion, and I'll try not to cry.
That's a good. Oh, this is what I'm talking about. Yeah, got it.
Also, my significant other is not too keen on too much heat in the curry, and that's another reason for me to not add chilies.
Hey, my boy.
To be honest, I'm too lazy to make rotis. I just go and I buy them. It's true.